days when I don't.
Sure.
We all have.
Understood. But,
Oh.
right, all right. Thank you for snow. All right, let's get straight into chapter 33. We highly anticipated this reunion last week and saw all the machinations that happened getting ready for it. And now it's time for it to happen. So I really don't want to break this up. I just want to read the whole thing. Want somebody to read the whole thing.
What part do you want?
Let me read the whole chapters.
I got you.
That I'm aware of.
Genesis chapter 33.
Yes, sir.
Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. And he put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed down. And Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." And Jacob said, "No, please. If now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand. For I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please take my gift which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. And if they are driven hard, one day all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord pass on before his servant, and I will proceed at my leisure according to the pace of the cattle that are before me and according to the pace of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir." And Esau said, "Please let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the place is named Succoth. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram and camped before the city. And he brought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel.
Okay. All right, let's start with the way that Jacob ordered the family. What do you have any thoughts about why Jacob would order the family in such a way to go meet Esau? We're going to start with Rachel and Bilhah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if they weren't coming in peace, because he was coming with 400 men, then he put Rachel last because that's who was most important.
Yeah.
And he started with who was least important.
This has a little bit of military type understanding. So there will be at least a little bit of protection for Rachel and Joseph. So
I will point out that he went to the front.
yeah, he went.
Yeah.
And behind, he didn't have them shielding him.
Yeah,
He went to the front.
he went first. Yes,
He was going to take his licks.
to his credit. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, otherwise, just big picture, what surprises you in this chapter especially given everything we have known about Jacob and Esau prior to this chapter? What catches you off guard?
I just love it. I wish we knew Esau's story between the time that Jacob had left and now, because it's a different reaction, a different person. So I would love to know his story, but,
This is kind of like, who are you and where did you come from?
and yeah, what did you
Both
do
states.
with Esau?
Yeah, that's a very astute point. I've got an idea about that. I'm going to suggest in a few minutes, but that's just it. Esau kind of catches us off guard because we're fully in 32 when we've read 400 men. Rachel never told him that he had chilled out, and oh boy, yeah. So that was definitely a surprise. What else?
Well, Jacob's still deceiving Esau
Yeah.
because he did not want to follow him to Sarah.
Yeah, at the end, yeah.
He went a completely different way after he told him he'd follow him.
Now, there's a commentator named Kaufman who believes that, Kaufman who thinks that Jacob was not being as much deceptive as he was passing on an invitation to come visit her. And his justification for believing that is the amount of water. Now, I'm not saying I buy that, but just wanted to put that out there.
They also say that the follow meant more along the lines, I'm not, later, right?
Yeah. Yes. Now, given everything we've read about Jacob from chapter 25, chapter 33, that makes more sense.
Yeah, it does.
I think Jacob was taking every precaution he could think of to downplay Esau's potential anger against him.
Okay,
And so I think Jacob was working real hard.
okay. He is coming to diffuse. Yeah, good, very good. Now, here's the answer. Go ahead.
He's also making his own way, right? He had stolen his brother's birthright, right? Way back, okay? And here, he goes to a place, he buys the land, steal it from his brother, right? Okay, so he's making his own way. Again, this is inconsistent with
Yeah,
old Jacob, but
yeah. Good point, good point. Now, in light of the idea of what Jack just said, all the effort that Jacob is going to here, we layer that with Cheryl mentioning this radical transformation in Esau, and you see all the links he's going to here. Both of these men are going overboard, second mile to try to make peace in this situation. Look at Jacob first, and then we're going to look at Esau. Look in this text and tell me some specific things Jacob did to basically indicate I'm coming in peace.
bowing 7 times.
Yeah, all right, that's a big one. By the way, that would be the way that someone would bow before a king or a dignitary of some kind. So he bows before him 7 times, okay? What else did Jacob do?
Well, he presented him a present. The
Yes,
problem is the word present. Was it? Never says what the present is. But there's an indication that it might have been trying to give back in some way, in some sense, that blessing.
maybe, yeah. I tend to think the physical gift was the chapter 32. Now, the motive for it, I'm with you. But it is an extraordinary, and yep. So that is an additional thing. So we've got a bowing, we've sent these very generous gifts.
He calls him my Lord.
Calls him his Lord, okay? Does that 4 times. Now, this is very important. When he calls Esau my Lord, we don't want to conflate that with Jacob renouncing what God has given him.
Right.
Okay? because God has clearly established that the line is continuing through Jacob. Okay, so he is acting in line with how someone would approach a dignified ruler. He's acting more culturally appropriate than renouncing anything that God has given him. Does that make sense?
Also been in far off land for quite a while. This is not his land anymore. In a lot of ways.
Okay. All right. What do you think about Jacob saying, just I've seen your face. I feel like I've seen the face of God. It's almost like a flattery will get you everywhere.
Exactly.
But it is pretty extraordinary effort. So what we've established is we've bowed before Esau 7 times, called Esau was Lord 4 times, called himself Esau's servant once. He sent the gifts ahead of time. He later insisted that Esau keep the gifts when Esau initially said, nah. Now, if Esau had refused those gifts, that after a second time, that could have implied maybe there's going to be some further tension. So we don't see that. Now, what are some things that Esau did?
Hugged him and wept.
Yeah, and that is not what we expected. Ran
Ran to meet him.
fell on this, and we, historically, we understand the significance of running. That's not a particularly dignified thing to do, but he takes off running, falls on his neck, kisses him. What else?
His actions indicate almost a forgiving or there's no hard feelings.
Throughout this whole thing. Yep, throughout this whole thing.
He shows an interest too. I mean, hard to say, but he says, who are these people? This is great. Who are all these people?
Yeah.
Who's this with you?
Yeah.
You left alone.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so there's some interest. Okay, good. What kind of offers did he make?
Escort them back.
Yeah, yeah.
He says no, and so he offered protection, you know, and he still said no. Esau seems more at peace than Jacob does.
Yeah, which is fascinating, isn't it? Tom, go ahead, and then we'll come back to something Cheryl just said.
Since God led Jacob through this challenging trials and tests that increased his faith, didn't Jacob realize that the deliverance from Esau's anger was from God?
There is in this text something about Jacob that we have not seen previously. If you will look in verse 5, verse 10, and then again in verse 11, Jacob has suddenly become a deeply spiritual man. I would suggest that a wrestling match with God will do that to you, in my opinion. But in light of something that Tom mentioned here, Jacob does. Now, all that being said, we're going to see a step backwards here in just a few minutes. But there is a big role that God has played in this whole reunion. We don't know what God has done in Esau's life, but that could not have just happened. I don't buy it. God was doing something in Esau's life.
Do we have any idea how many years? What was Esau at this time? Does it say?
They had been separated about 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, so then that's how long that Jacob had been gone and was working his way back. So neither one of them's a young pup.
So there was plenty of time for Jacob to make up to Esau finally, and for Esau to have forgotten all of that stuff that happened before.
I don't think Jacob believed that Esau had forgotten.
Right.
Right, I agree with
Because,
that.
I still think at the end of the day, here in this chapter, that Jacob was still concerned about, he didn't want Esau's men to stay with him.
Yeah.
He trusted more God's, guidance than he did Esau's.
And I will tell you this too. You can be totally, you can have one feeling about, and it's just me. You can have one feeling about Esau and have a different feeling about his men too. That we're having this moment here and we're both going overboard. But I still see your 400 dudes. And I'm still not quite sure about all of them. And maybe it'd be best if you get on ahead. Get way ahead while you're at it. And we'll follow along behind at the pace that's good for all the ones. So there is some of that going on at the end of this. It's beautiful to see this coming together through all of this and this reunion. Now, we don't know, we don't know how much more Jacob and Esau interacted after this. But we do know that this relationship looks far different than what we have seen previously. Now, that is all pretty. We have a transition. After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, verse 18, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, where he's supposed to be headed, in the direction anyway. Scholars, by the way, think that Jacob stayed in Succoth at least 2 years, could have been as many as 8 to 10 years. So he was in Succoth for quite a while. Arrived at Shechem, he's camped within sight of the city. He buys a piece of land for 100 pieces of whatever kind of money it was. He bought the land from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. And those names are going to be trouble. Now, before we get to the trouble, Jacob does something here that we don't read in this text. Okay? I want you to hold your finger in Genesis 33 because we're going to take a quick trip, but we're coming right back. I want you to look at something in John chapter 4.
Here. Oh, Jonah.
You didn't think we were going to be talking about the Samaritan woman tonight, did you? Verse 4, he had to go through Samaria. That's its own sermon. He came to a town in Samaria called Sychar near the plot of ground where Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Okay, so we will find in Genesis 48 that transaction. Verse 6 says Jacob's well was there. How did Jacob's well end up being there? How does a well end up being somewhere? To dig it. Okay. So
Isn't this one of the wells they redug at one time?
that I can't remember. I know it was dug here. And the point I wanted to make is this well between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal is a place where this much later, Jesus is going to encounter this Samaritan woman. It's an interesting connection. Now, the altar is El Elohe Israel. Okay, El for God. El is the God of Israel, or mighty is the God of Israel. or mighty is the mighty God of Israel, is El Elohe Israel. Now, when we say mighty is the God of Israel, our minds naturally think mighty is the God of a location. This is mighty is the God of Jacob's people being changed to Israel. Okay. This is important because Jacob had been referring to constantly in his interactions with Isaac and others, your God, your God, your God. Now we're building an altar, El Elohe Israel, mighty is Israel's God. Okay, so that is hugely, hugely significant. All right, now, for the rest of our time tonight, we'll be dealing with a passage that to me is a stinker. When you read this, you will think, what in the world am I supposed to learn from this? It is sordid. Paul says all scripture is God breathed and is profitable. If it weren't profitable, it wouldn't be here. So hold down to that thought. Maybe hold on to that thought for your dear life, but hold it. So now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and he raped her. If you have another version, it's got more words there. We're going to talk about that in a moment. His heart was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman, spoke tenderly to her. Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields. As soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel or at Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter. This should not be done. But Hamor said to them, "My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife and to marry with us. Give us your daughters. Take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, acquire property in it." And Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes. I'll give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I'm to bring as great as you like. I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me the young woman as my wife." Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully, shocked, as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, "We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who was not circumcised. That'd be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We will settle among you. We'll become one people with you. But if you do not agree to be circumcised, we will take our sister and go." Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, note this phrase, who was the most honored in all of his father's family, lost no time in doing what they said because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of the city to speak to the men of the city. "These men are friendly toward us," they said. "Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters, they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't their livestock and their property and all their other animals eventually become ours? So let us agree to their terms and they will settle among us." All the men who went out to the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in that city was circumcised. 3 days later, all of them were still in pain. Two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized the flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" Let's start here. What name is missing in chapter 34? God. Start there. Okay. That's what's missing. All right. So in chapter 33, Jacob purchases property. He builds a house. He builds an altar. It looks like he calls it El Elohe Israel. He appears that he plans to stay a long time. He's probably stayed about 10 years when this happens. He's been in Shechem about 10 years. That's not where he's supposed to stay. He's supposed to go back home. He's supposed to go back to his family. Jacob is not where he's supposed to be. Dinah, daughter of Leah, went out to visit the women of the land. That seems so innocuous to us. You go visit the women of the land. You don't think thing about that. Dinah's probably 13 to 15-ish at this time, maybe 16. That means she's of marriageable age. I know that makes us squirm, but it's a different day. Walkie says that girls of marriageable age were not permitted to leave the tents of their people without a chaperone. So she has either chosen to go out without a chaperone. None of y'all have ever known of a child to leave home without your permission. Or her parents were negligent and for whatever reason, she's out of the house.
Well, before that, the chaperone has to be a male chaperone.
Yeah. Right. We don't know where Dinah was headed. There were all kinds of pagan festivals in Shechem. We don't know if she was headed to one or not. Text doesn't say. Text doesn't say anything about how she felt about being in this house. Rachel is loved. Leah is tolerated. And she is the daughter, not the son of the wife who was tolerated. So however she feels about that. For whatever motive, she heads out of the house. Now, Richard, can you read what translation are you reading out of?
New American Standard.
All right, read your translation of verse 2, just that verse.
And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force.
Okay. One thing the NIV does here that I'm not a particular fan of, I genuinely really like reading out of this and studying out of this. But in this particular case, they take a lot of Hebrew words and they roll them up together and then they use the word rape. Okay. There's a lot more Hebrew words here. Okay.
My NIV says violated.
Okay. All right.
Mine says humbled.
Okay. So, you have an 84. Probably got an 84. I think that's the one that said, if I remember.
There's a footnote in the American Standard that says humble tall.
And, yeah,
Doesn't mean the same.
now this humbled is more in the context of humiliated.
Yeah.
Not like took somebody high and mighty and humbled them. It's more of a humiliated her. Okay?
That fits.
Now, I am not telling you by any stretch of the imagination that anything that happened to her was appropriate. It wasn't. The way that the text reads in the original language is she was violated. The original text is a lot more clear regarding to what extent she was or wasn't okay with it. Okay, and I'm not saying any of it was right. It was wrong. It was clearly wrong. Okay. But the first words of yiqua means to fetch or grasp or seize. Yizkav means sexual relations made to lie down. Aneha means violated or humiliated. Now here's the weird part. You're saying that's horrible. Here's the weirder part. Afterward, his heart is drawn to her. And now it's almost the reverse of David. Now, instead of being repulsed, he's drawn. And he's just got to have her. He wants to speak tenderly to her, falls in love with her. And then you've got Shechem and Hamor that seem to think this is an okay practice. We're just going to make a financial arrangement and settle it here.
Well, they were pagans,
Yeah.
very pagan.
Yeah.
This whole story is like, why did it occur? You know, what's going on here? What's the whole idea of it? And it seems to be the fact that God did not want Jacob, Israel, to stay in Shechem.
He's got
To be a part of the Canaanites and get demonized, get all of this. So this whole chapter seems to me to be a crunch point to say, you're not going to stay here and all of this happened now, you're leaving.
You gotta get out. Now, the brothers at the beginning definitely have the right emotion, shocked and furious. That's the way brothers should be, shocked and furious. Okay. Problem is once we deal with this shock and fury, we've got the rest of the actions of Levi and Simeon in this chapter. So tell me your perspective of the actions of Levi and Simeon. I don't anticipate anybody wants to stand up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for them, but they were deceitful. They were violent. They just took bad acts and piled on.
Yeah. And they took an absolutely horrific situation and
Made it more.
amplified it.
Yeah.
And you got that on several levels, okay? So you've got the whole rite of circumcision was to be something to unite God's covenant people and separate them from the rest of the nations. We're basically taking the rite of circumcision and flipping it around here, okay? So you're doing that with a right given by God. They're correctly opposing the intermarriage.
Yep.
Jacob's silence in all of this is baffling, by the way. He's silent until the end of the chapter. And then you've got verse 19.
Yeah.
The young man who was most honored in all of his father's family. Would you like to know who was dishonored in that family? by comparison. You've got the whole question of what was worse, the violation of Dinah or the wholesale murder of the men of Shechem, their whole city being looted, the imprisonment of women and children? I guess the answer to that question is yes. But it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And it's going to cost Levi and Simeon when we get to the end of Genesis.
I might be reading a lot into this, but I think the second half of 19 is, you know, at first you look at it and it's like it doesn't belong to the rest of the chapter. He was honored more than his whole father's household. This was the guy that raped Dinah.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the society that he was in, that a man who had, you know, these morals and these kind of attitudes was honored. And it speaks to what had happened to Jacob and his family spending 10 years there.
Hence, we got to get out. God's got to get them out of there.
Yeah. But I was gonna say that in some ways, a lot of this is an object lesson in not obeying God and what you're not supposed to do, which is to live with and therefore take on the practices of heathens.
Yeah. And
I'm surprised about Jacob asking his family, so to say, all their gods, their foreign gods, to turn them in. You know, it's like, what are they doing with them?
yeah, that's a whole nother.
Weird.
Isn't this a good lesson for us today that the forgiven who won't forgive can expect bad days ahead?
Say that again, brother. I missed the last part. I think some of them got it. I didn't.
The forgiven who won't forgive can expect bad days ahead.
Well, they're coming. They're definitely coming. Jacob finally speaks in verse 30. What do you notice about Jacob's speech in verse 30?
About him.
Yeah, all the references to God that we saw in verse 33 are not apparent in verse 34. He's got eye issues. All over verses 30 or just verse 30. If I counted right, he used I, my, or me 8 times.
Yeah.
His daughter's been violated, his sons have breached a contract, the city's been plundered, the women and children have been taken captive, the sons have committed unspeakable wickedness, and Jacob's going, I, my, me. We have no indication in Genesis 34 that Dinah and Jacob ever had a conversation. Period. That contrasts so sharply with the altar he built in chapter 33. El Elohe Israel. Okay. This altar is built as a testimony to the character of God. And now Simeon and Levi are doing what they do.
But you know, this is a story, okay, it's an extreme story, it's an extreme of lives, right? Before, he was in the ascendancy of his faith. He went where he shouldn't have gone, lived with the people he shouldn't have lived with, and now it's I, me, mine.
Yep. Yeah. Good point. So there's a reason in chapter 35, God says to Jacob, go up to Bethel. Right? And that's where we're going to pick up next week. And I promise you, it gets better next week. So we see big picture. We see what happens when God is taken out of the picture. We see in chapter 33 what happens when God is in the picture. We see in chapter 34 what happens when God is out of the picture. One of the things we see in 34 is everybody being led by flesh and passion. This is not that this applies to 2024 or anything, but this is what happens when everybody follows their hearts. By heart, I mean, when they follow their passion, when they follow their desires.
Feels good, do it.
Yeah, the whole feels good, do it thing, man. Absolutely. Jacob's absence in this as a spiritual leader, shows us a lot. And yet we are still seeing that God is going to keep his promises.
And
And hence he's going to go to Bethel next week. And then we'll pick up from there. All right, Chip, can you pray us out, please, sir?
Father, thank you for your wisdom. Father, help us to see that what happened here with Jacob and his family, they went where they shouldn't have gone, stayed where they shouldn't have gone, and a lot of evil occurred. Father, the same thing happens to us in our lives. Help us always to put you first and quickly show us when we have not. In Jesus' name, amen.
thanks, Chip.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate y'all very much.
Room was included.
Hi, everybody.